property, the rights or interests which the owner has in the thing he owns. Personal property can be alienated, be hypothecated, or can sometimes become real property. Real property, realty, generally immovable. It includes land. Minerals are real property until they are mined, at which time they become personal property. Riparian rights, the right of a landowner to the reasonable and appropriate use of water from a stream, river, or watercourse touching his land. Riparian rights can be severed from the land by condemnation or prescription. Literal rights, the right of a landowner to the reasonable and appropriate use of water from a lake, sea, or ocean touching his land. Appropriation, only the state can give permission to a non-riparian owner to take water from a river or lake. A water table denotes the depth where water is found. Underground waters not in a defined channel are called percolating waters. A flood hazard is classified as frequent when flooding occurs on average more than once in a 10-year period. For example, 2 or more times in 10 years. Anything affixed to the land. Vegetation. Fixtures. They are incorporated into the land. Maria. Method. Adaptability. Relationship. Intention. Agreement. Implements. Growing annual crops, industrial crops, and cultivated crops are considered real property between buyer and seller. Implements are personal property between landlord and tenant. The tenant farmer has the right to harvest his crops even after his lease has expired. Size and cost of the item or time of attachment are not tests for a fixture. Trade fixtures, articles of personal property that a tenant has attached to real property which are necessary in his trade or business. A fence which is removed by the owner and placed on the ground would be personal property. A fixed personal property should not be removed without the written consent of all parties. Appurtenances. Appurtenances run with the land. They do not need to be mentioned in the deed or contract. They pass automatically to the new owner. Stock in a mutual water company. It is appurtenant to a specific parcel. Estates. Ownership rights and interests which are or could become possessory. Estates or fees. Freehold estate endures for a period which is not fixed or specified. Fee simple estate. Fee, estate in fee, perpetual estate, estate of inheritance. It is indefinite in duration and can be conveyed during life or upon death. It may have encumbrances. Life estate, a freehold estate. It creates more than one estate in the property. Holder of life estate, life tenant, may sell, encumber, or lease it for the duration. Cannot will or devise life estate if based on his own life. Estate in reversion, estate in remainder, less than freehold estate. Types of leasehold estates. Estate for years. Lease continues for a definite period fixed in advance. Fixed in advance. No notice to terminate is required. May be for days, weeks, months, or years. Estate at sufferance. Lessee, holdover tenant, has rightfully come into possession but retains possession after the expiration of his term, without the consent of the landlord. Acceptance of rent by landlord constitutes consent, which would make it an estate at will or a periodic tendency. Net lease. Lessee pays variable expenses such as taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Lessor receives fixed income. Percentage lease. Lessee often pays rent based on percentage of gross receipts. Escalator clause. Commercial leases often use the consumer price index. Housing costs are included in the consumer price index because for most families they are a major expenditure. Sandwich lease. Leasehold interest, which lies between the primary and the operating lease. Leasehold estates in real property are personal property. The tenant of an apartment and the owner-occupant of a condominium would both have an estate in property. A tenant who knows of or suspects that a release of hazardous substance has occurred on the or beneath the property must notify the owner or lessor in writing. The lessor, landlord, conveys a portion of his estate for a term less than his own, holds a reversionary interest, an estate in reversion. Maximum lease on agricultural or horticultural lands, 51 years. Maximum lease on urban property, 99 years. if in writing, must be signed by the lessor. A lessee taking possession and paying the rent binds himself to the lease. Constructive eviction. Tenant must notify landlord about needed repairs and allow landlord reasonable time to repair. If tenant decides to terminate lease, tenant does not need to give 30 days notice. If tenant fails to pay rent, landlord may evict the tenant by an unlawful detainer action, court suit. Tenant has the right to quiet enjoyment and possession of the property for the purpose for which it was leased. Surrender. Termination of the lease by mutual agreement of the parties. Transfer of interest by tenant. Tenant may transfer his interest unless original lease prohibits it, in which case contract transferring interest is voidable by landlord. Assignment. Tenant, assignor,